So good morning. My name is Harrison Mantis, and I am the reporter here for the International Fact-Checking Network. Welcome to today's IFCN talk. Today, we are going to be speaking with members of the Duke Reporters Lab about their automated fact-checking project Squash, and we're going to get their insights. If you're in the Northeast, there's a lot of insects right now, but that's not what we're here to do. We're going to get their insights about how this kind of technology works and what its potential is for the world of fact-checking. We're joined today by Lab Director Bill Adair, Lead Technologist Christopher Guest, and Project Manager Erica Ryan. And we're going to start off with a presentation from Bill. So with that, Bill, take it away.
Thank you so much, Harrison. Thank you so much for having us. And I just want to start off by saying that when we made Squash, we've done it without any harmful insecticides. So, there's no need to worry about any environmental concerns here. So it's such a thrill to be here. And I need to say this is really a story of a great team, two of whom are here and others who are not. So let me just talk about the team a little bit as we get started. First and foremost is Chris, who is just one of the great minds in journalism and tech, and we've been so fortunate to have him. He made this thing happen, and he solved a million problems and showed incredible creativity. And you're going to hear a tremendous story today about what he did. And Erica Ryan is the most organized person on the planet, and she kept us all going and kept things together. And she's just amazing. She's our project manager. Chris is the lead technologist in the Reporters Lab. And then others who are watching but not here on the panel, Mark Stencil, who's the co-director of the Reporters Lab and the most creative person in journalism tech, was along for the ride at every step, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And Joel Luther, who was involved in all of our testing and oversees our claim review project, has been a vital person in all this, and he's along too. So we have a tremendous team, and so fortunate to have such a great group to work with. Not only have we conquered a lot of different things, but we have a lot of fun. So although Chris insisted that I not show some of the photos from one of our crazier nights. So I'm going to do a brief presentation to talk a little bit about Squash and put it in perspective for all of you. So let me share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that all right? Great. So we're going to talk today about lessons, and we're going to be pretty humble about all this. We're not, although I think we broke a lot of ground, we didn't quite get a product ready for prime time, and we want to explain why that is. And we also want to pay tribute to some of the others who have done great work in this area, because we're building on the shoulders of some others who've done some tremendous work. First, I need to acknowledge our funders. Squash is part of the Duke Tech and Check Cooperative, which is funded by Knight Foundation, which gave us 2 grants, by Google, which paid for a variety of things, particularly some of our claim review work. The Craig Newmark Philanthropies. Craig has been a great supporter of the Tech and Check Cooperative, and the Facebook Journalism Project, which has supported our work in claim review and media review. And I'll talk a little bit about claim review. As I mentioned, this is all part of kind of an umbrella organization that we call the Tech and Check Cooperative. And this is an international effort to bring everybody together. We've had several meetings where we get people together in person. We've had monthly meetings where we have presenters from leaders and innovators all around the world. And this is really where we've learned who's doing some of the tremendous work. And I want to mention a couple today. Our friends at Chicago have done some tremendous work in this area. and also Full Fact in Britain has done some great and inspiring work. And so we are by no means alone in doing what we're doing here, and we've learned a lot from them. What we try to do here is to try to put fact checking on screen instantly in ways and at scale that is incredibly hard technically. And this was a dream that many PolitiFact readers had. This is an actual slide. Actually, this is an actual slide from my PowerPoint in 2010. So when we started PolitiFact in 2007, so this is long before I came to Duke, readers started to write in and say, you know, it would be cool, you should put the Truthometer on TV. And so I mocked up this PowerPoint image of this guy watching a campaign ad, and my idea, the reader's idea, everybody's idea, it was not a unique idea, was that somehow it would be automated so that the fact check would pop up automatically. The app would detect what the campaign ad said, and the Truthometer would pop up and say false. And in my very simplistic vision here, this is what it would look like. And this is a very simplistic vision, and it would come back to haunt me later, because this display, it turns out, is very complicated. What you decide to put on the screen became one of our biggest challenges, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But this was the original vision, and it was a PowerPoint on my laptop starting in 2010, and I showed it in a bunch of different places. So live fact checking. Live fact checking works because politicians repeat their lines. You know, we all know this if we're fact checking journalists, or we know it just if we listen to politicians talk. They say the same things over and over again. And if they've been fact checked before, we can pull up that previous fact check and display it on the screen. So just from a very simple basis, live fact checking works. Now, the trick, though, is that they may say it slightly differently. And so you have to be careful in how you present it on the screen. So you can't give viewers the impression that you are doing an instant fact check on what's being said. What you're doing is presenting a related fact check. So the politician is saying something related to what they've said, and so you have to make sure that you say this is a related fact check. Now, often they will say something identical. One of our demos involves Elizabeth Warren, a Democratic candidate here in the United States. She made a claim at a Democratic debate that was virtually identical to one that PolitiFact had fact-checked before. And so that, when Squash popped that one up, you know, we were high-fiving. It was awesome. And so that does happen. Sometimes that happened with our former president, but more often than not, we're serving up a related fact check that is similar, but not quite the same. Here's the Elizabeth Warren one. And this was when you see this one live, when you see the video, she's saying virtually the same thing.
Hey,
so,
Bill, sorry to jump in and interrupt you here. We seem to be having some blocks on the screen that are blocking part of your slides. Would you mind unsharing and resharing your screen real quick, just to see if that clears it?
If I move that, does that help, Harrison?
Yes, that helps.
Okay. Yeah. I think I just needed to move you guys out of the way.
Oh, we're in the way. Okay. Sorry for being in the way.
If you could just sit down, please. Okay. So what makes this all possible? So we separately from Squash, had a related project, actually grew out of a totally different project that was an idea of Glenn Kessler of the Washington Post, and something that he took to Google that ended up being a tagging system called claim review. And so we worked with Google to develop this and develop this tagging system that now about half of the fact checkers in the world use, that has been really helpful to get fact checks highlighted in search results, that can be used in many other ways to help fact checks get exposure from tech platforms in many different ways. And I didn't realize when we did that we were in effect creating a big database of fact checks. And Mark Stencil came into my office one day and said, well, you realize what you've done by developing claim review, which is also something Chris and Erica and Joel have been involved in. You've created this database that makes live fact checking possible. And I sort of pretended that was a master plan. I had no idea that was a benefit of what we had done, which gives you an idea of how incredibly naive I am about all of this stuff, and why I'm so fortunate to have such a talented team. So claim review makes this possible because claim review creates this big database of fact checks that we can draw from. So why is that important? It's important because it solves the blob of text problem. If we want to find fact checks that match, we're better off being able to identify the speaker and the claim than just searching all the text of the fact check. So here's the blob of text of an Elizabeth Warren fact check. And to try to search this to find what the fact check is about would take a lot more computing horsepower. But with claim review, we can zero right in on what the claim is about. So that then allows us to have a giant database of fact checks that's more easily searchable and usable for Squash. So now Squash has a big bucket of fact checks that we can draw from. So here's how Squash works, and hopefully you can see all of this on the screen. So it begins with the politician saying something. So in this case, Elizabeth Warren saying insurance companies suck $23 billion out of the system. Her words are then, the audio of her words are converted to text. That is done by Google Cloud. And I like to sort of envision it going up into the cloud, but Chris tells me it doesn't actually go up into the sky. So it's converted to text, just like any voice to text file is. We used Google Cloud, our students, and we had a whole nother team of students led by Professor Jun Yang at Duke, who worked on this part of it. Our students chose Google Cloud because it had some capabilities that we needed. And then these students came up with a really creative idea to use ClaimBuster, which is an algorithm developed at the University of Texas at Arlington to filter out the non-factual claims. A lot of you are familiar with ClaimBuster. It helps find claims to fact check. So that sort of acts as a colander, and that sifts out sentences that wouldn't be fact checked, that Squash wouldn't be interested in. And now that leaves just the sentences that potentially might be matchable. And then here's where Chris is using a search engine or matching algorithm. In this case, he's using Elasticsearch, and he's matching the text of what Elizabeth Warren said against that big database of fact checks, and like looking through that file cabinet. And then in the file cabinet, Squash is now suggesting 3 top matches and presenting them to a human editor. We decided we had to use a human editor because we needed the human for that final decision to pick the best match. And the human editor then uses a tool that Chris built that we call Gardener. And the human, I love how we reduce people to the human then selects the best match. And that's what gets displayed on the screen. So that is how squash works. Seems simple, incredibly complex. And just a tribute to a lot of smart people along the way. You could hear all the people who contributed to that. And of course, then Erica with to-do lists, making sure that we got it all done. And me saying, I have no idea what's going on. Okay, so just a little bit about our tests. First test, 2019, bad night, by the way. We had another thing, we had this app and it crashed and I was cursing and it was not pretty. But in the meantime, squash was behaving great and working, and we had 6 matches and it was totally cool. And 6 good matches. That was 2019. Then, well, not so good, because we had 14 missed matches. So matches that we should have gotten that it didn't see, and we had lots of voice to text difficulties. And some of the matches, I'll show you one, were just comically bad. So like this one, what Squash heard, we celebrate 50 years since brave young pilots flew 250,000 miles through space to play on the face of the moon. Squash then matched that with a Washington Post fact check about, is it not a disgrace that it can now take 10 years just to get a permit approved for a simple road? So I don't think that those things are related. So that gives you a sense. We had some work to do, but that was 2019. So that was 2 years ago. So Chris improved it. By 2020, we did better. We had 14 relevant matches. So that was up from 6. Our voice to text was better. So Google Cloud was doing better. Chris also tweaked that. Still, that was when we realized we needed human help. So that's when we decided to build Gardener. Everything has a gardening metaphor in our naming conventions. So Gardener, in effect, weeded out the bad matches, and Erica and Chris are going to do a little demo here and explain how that works. So let me stop sharing here, and I'm going to pull up the video.
Okay, great. So Bill is going to play a video, and what it is a screen recording that our wonderful colleague Joel Luther took. This was during former President Trump's town hall last fall, and Joel was one of our gardeners for that night, along with Chris and me and Bill and Mark Stencil and our colleague Kathy Clabby. So we were all reviewing the matches as they came in from Squash. So you'll see what the voice to text heard, and then Squash searched for and found some matches that it hopes are relevant, and then we then go through and look through those matches and see if any of them are worthy of being put in front of our users. So you'll see the voice to text claims pop up as the video plays live, and then you'll see Joel choose one of the matches to review and then approve one of the matches, and then we'll jump to the web interface prototype that our colleague Justin Reese designed, and he had a clever idea. It's styled to look like a chat, so the claims come in on the right, and Squash's response to that claim, which was a relevant fact check, will come in on the left.
I have done more for the African-American community than any president, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln. Criminal justice reform, prison reform, historically Black colleges and universities. I got them funded. They were on a year-to-year basis. They could have been put out of business. As soon as our country had a little bad year, they would have said, I'm sorry, we're not going to fund you. I got them 10-year funding and financing, and more than they even asked for. I became very friendly with a lot of the heads, but we've done more. And of course, opportunity zones. But criminal justice reform, everybody said it could not be done. President Obama and Biden never even tried to do it. They never even tried. But I say that, and I say it often. I'll say it loud, and I'm very proud of it. And I have a great relationship because of what I've done with the African American community. I'm very proud of it. President Obama and Biden never even tried to do it. They never even tried. But I say that, and I say it often. I'll say it loud, and I'm very proud of it. And I have a great relationship because of what I've done with the African American community. I'm very proud of it.
Cool. So, and that last part is what you would see as a viewer if you were watching it on the web. And so you would see those two things on your screen. So finally, let me talk about the sort of what our big lessons are. And so I think of these as the hurdles to moving forward with live on-screen fact checking. And there are four that I think need to be addressed. The biggest one is there just aren't enough fact checks. So that bucket of fact checks needs to be bigger or more full of fact checks. There just aren't enough fact checks. So when we were debating last week, like how many is enough, and Chris and Erica and I were going back and forth. And I don't know, what were you saying, Chris? Like how many?
What I was saying is that it's more about breadth of topics than it is deep on a single one. So you need something that can represent, you need a corpus that can represent all the different topics that somebody could be speaking about instead of just like 100 on capital gains tax or something.
But we're talking about dozens and dozens of fact checks. And so like the other couple of weeks ago, we did Biden's news conference, which we can remember vividly because there's only been one. And it was, we only had 2 matches. And it was because he just hasn't been fact checked as much as the previous president. And whereas with Trump, I mean, he had just been fact checked so often, and multiple times. And, in the case of Biden, he's just not being fact checked as much.
Right. And just to add in there, Bill, like by the end of the Republican National Convention and with the second presidential debate, we were getting as many as 30 relevant matches in the course of like a 90-minute debate. We had a lot of matches in the database that were working with the claims that were being repeated by the president and the vice president at the time.
So, so that looms as a challenge, and particularly if you go down and want to do live on-screen fact checking at a state and local level. If you wanted to do a speech by a governor or by a US senator or even a House member, there just aren't enough fact checks. So that's a big challenge, number one. Now, fixable if you could put more resources into fact checking. Big challenge number 2 is voice to text. We know Siri, is gradually getting better, Siri being just one example of voice to text. And we saw some improvements in Google Cloud. Chris tweaked it, enabled a dictionary that showed us some improvement in one of the later events. But still, that's an area where we just know that, we just weren't getting the sort of reliability that we needed. So that's sort of number 2. Number 3 is the matching algorithm. And this is an area where Chris has been experimenting. You want to talk a little bit about your tagging, your subject tagging and the progress you made there, Chris?
Yeah, so this is something that I believe I've been talking about for quite a while to some of you, but essentially I've been working on a system to, instead of look at the exact words and concepts that are, well, really the exact phraseology that's being used between different claims. So say, somebody repeats almost exactly the same talking point over and over. Instead, what I've been thinking about is that if we can If we can instead tag them by themes and predict themes on a single claim, we can then look at other claims that would match the similar themes. And I think that's probably the next really big step in fact matching, because the fact is that teaching a computer to lexically analyze and determine whether the capital gains tax and the death tax are exactly the same, that's almost an impossible thing to do. Well, they're not exactly the same, but in the same ballpark. However, they both do involve taxes, and so the claims are more likely to be similar.
And then the final big hurdle is one we just didn't have the resources to really explore as deeply as we wanted, which is what to put on the screen, the user experience or UX problem. And that was something that I naively thought, you stick a truthometer up there and people will know. But of course, the problem is you stick a truthometer up there and you also have to say what the related fact check was, and you run the risk. And this is something I think Full Fact pointed out at one point in some of their presentations. Things are said different ways, and so it's entirely possible. We discovered that you could have a related fact check that's true, that pops up on a claim that a politician just said that is false. And so people would see the new statement is true and they'd be like, well, what he just said is wrong, So all sorts of complications with that, not to mention how soon does it pop up? And if it's two candidates debating quickly, does it pop up on the wrong person or the next person? And then do people know that it's on the previous candidate? And it's incredibly complex. So we tried to get at that with what Erica was showing you with the web view. And we didn't have a chance to do user testing with that. So that's a whole nother avenue for interesting exploration. So anyway, lots of hard challenges here for others to pursue. We're happy to take questions from you, Harrison, from others, whatever you want to do it.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask some questions, but we got some good ones in the Q&A feature already. A couple good ones in here. If you have any questions, I see some of you putting them in the chat. There is the Q&A feature here at the bottom. It says Q&A, and there's two little speech bubbles. If you want to just enter your questions there, we'll get them answered. This first one comes from Roger McDonald, and the question is, given sufficient tech and funding, what are the next feasible milestones along the path to dynamic fact checking, and which teams and orgs are currently most well positioned to take up the baton that you're passing?
Chris, what do you think? What do you think, like, where do you think the next big improvement is?
For this, it's definitely within the matching aspects, right? Because that's really the hardest, that's really the hard question here. On the technical side, there's obviously the UX, as you just mentioned as well, but when it comes to the matching, the fact is that there's just nobody really doing it all that well. Like, a lot of people are working on it, and thank you for all the other groups that are working on this as well. I don't mean to talk negatively about your work either, but there's just, we've all been working on it for a long time, and there hasn't been a ton of great demos in general, and very little, brought to production for sure. So that's probably going to be the next big steps, is how do we teach a machine to understand political speech or other, just other factual statements and compare them. It's a really, really hard problem. I think there's probably a couple PhDs in it.
Finally, I can get that PhD.
One thing, I have a question. One thing you were talking about is there aren't enough fact checks on this, and I know you pull from the claim review database to power this. I know, like, you guys at the Reporters Lab, I know you, Joel, particularly, you guys have collaborated with us at the IFCN to do trainings for fact checkers about how to use claim review. I know there's some organizations, forgive me, I'm forgetting which ones, that are working on ways to integrate claim review into content management systems like WordPress. Are there any projects that you guys see that can facilitate that can make it easier for fact checkers to take their work and put it into claim review so you can help this kind of technology?
Yeah, so the issue, Harrison, isn't getting fact checks into claim review. The issue is we need more fact checkers. I mean, it's really like we need more troops. And so making claim review isn't that hard, whether you make it using the WordPress plugin or using the Google markup tool or our own tool for FactStream. It's just that we need to hire more fact checkers, and it's almost like Report for America, which has, is this army of journalists. What we need is like fact check for the world. Like we need money to hire 1,000 fact checkers, and they should just all fact check everybody all the time.
But this is also probably a good opportunity to point out that our database is a subset of the claim review database, because we focus on the fact checks done by our partners, PolitiFact, the Washington Post, and factcheck.org. And they, of course, have done so much amazing work that makes this possible. We just want more and more and more of it because we're greedy.
Yes,
got it.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because and we have just been testing just in the US. We haven't used Squash internationally at all. And someone could do that if there are if there's a critical mass of fact checks in another place, as FullFact's done some experimenting in Britain with stuff like this, and they've done some cool stuff on Parliament.
Got it. Chris, you mentioned that you were looking at experimenting towards a sort of a theme matching instead of can you explain what experiments are you doing with that, and how is that working?
Well, the hardest part is actually building the data set for this. So we actually need to categorize hundreds, thousands of fact checks, if at all possible. And we're doing that manually, slowly over the last year or so. I built a nice little open source tool for that called Caucus, if anybody's actually interested. You can add your own databases to it to categorize yourself. So that's really the hard problem, is like with a lot of almost all machine learning problems, is just getting a training set to actually work on the problem in the first place. From there, it's making sure that it's wide enough, that we have enough examples of people talking about, different types of taxes, or different types of wars, or different types of, education and such things, so that we can go from broad to also specific. And of course, I know there's a lot of people from all over the world on this call, and so this is also very culturally contextual. So as Erica mentioned, we are just focusing on the US for this, and even within the 50 states, there's a broad range of differences, much less, say, UK political speech or Indian political speech or other languages. Unfortunately, the work is piecemeal at that point. But that's really the big thing, is trying to find a corpus of categorizable fact checks, categorized fact checks, and then building from there. Now we've taken some shortcuts in certain places, and I'm happy to talk offline about some of those.
And also, just to back up a step, one of the reasons that we focused in on subject categorization is because we looked at other things to try to give us better reliability in terms of accuracy of the matches. And we didn't really see that with some obvious things. So we tested like time, recency. So we looked at, if we limit the matches to just claims that were made in the last 3 months or 6 months or 9 months, does that improve our accuracy? And we found that it really didn't, that having the full range of fact checks, that were done over the past few years actually was better in terms of finding matches. We limited it by speaker. So we said, okay, if we're looking for matches to claims made by Joe Biden, if we only look at previous claims made by Joe Biden, does that improve our accuracy? And again, we didn't really see a great improvement, because sometimes, surrogates of these people make the claims, and then that ends up being helpful to find relevant matches. So we kind of narrowed in on subject categorization as a way of trying to tell a robot how to tell that something is more related, since time didn't seem to work and speaker didn't seem to work.
Got it. Chris, we had a question that popped up in the chat here about the tool that you mentioned, I think it was called Caucus.
Yeah, I just answered that in the chat and put a link to the GitHub in there.
Okay, never mind, I missed that. Sorry.
Yeah, so it's fully open source. Please get in touch if you want to use it. I'd be more than happy to help you out with it.
And and there's an app you can. Is that the link for the app?
It's not an app, but it is mobile ready, so it looks like an app.
There you go.
It makes it very easy, but there's not an iOS or Android app for it.
We try to get Duke students to use it, but they're too busy going to class.
Got it. We have one question here from Raj. Forgive me, Raj Ragar. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Raj Ragarajan. The question is this tech available to individuals or merely to institutions? So if other people want to take what you've done and run with it, how can that happen? Is this, yeah.
I'm sorry, somebody just crashed into the window in front of my hotel room here. So I think our plan is to ultimately make it available in GitHub, in terms of, so I think, our goal is for people to try to take what we've done and build on it. And so it's not like we're limiting who could do it. We would just tell you, this is not for the faint of heart. And this requires, $1 million effort. I mean, this is not anything you can just tinker with. This is something where you need thousands and thousands of fact checks for whatever area you're messing with, and a pretty serious, a pretty serious effort. Where I think there could be progress in incrementally would be to take pieces of it and to, like, I'd love to see people experiment with the on-screen display portion and try different things there. That's something that could be done in a much smaller way. Somebody could take the matching algorithm and play with that. So, but our hope is that others will try to build on what we've done. But in terms of, like, could you take what we've done and build a version for another country? Well, first of all, we didn't succeed in creating a polished version for our country with the largest number of fact checks, I think, probably of any country anywhere. So, so
Wow.
have modest expectations. Would be my advice. But we would love to see people build on what we've done and help refine this, because I think we've gotten things off to a great start, and we hope others can solve some of these problems that we've identified.
Got it. We had a question here from Matthias Bau, and he asks, would it be possible to train Squash with data aggregated with tools such as the WhatsApp fact check bot that some organizations are using to reach out to readers? So I think some organizations are using their WhatsApp tip lines and collecting information from their readers, and then using that to get fact checks out to people. So would it be possible to use this technology to get data from those databases and use it to train Squash?
I'll take this one. I think yes, absolutely. And in fact, the matching algorithms would be a very interesting use case. This would be a very interesting use case for the matching algorithms, in that it could make it more automatic than some of the tip lines. Now, the problem is that, of course, the matching algorithms are far from perfect sometimes. And so there should always, as we did in our project, have a human in between, but it could turn it into more of an approve, disapprove, instead of frantically searching your entire database by hand.
Got it. Got it. We've got a question here from Tanushri Mitra, and they mentioned here, say that you mentioned that live fact checking works because politicians repeat claims that have been fact checked before. Do you envision that this kind of technology can be extended to be used beyond just political speech for, e.g., false claims floated on social media by regular people?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that, that would be the dream. And for all of this, you can see the pieces come together that if enough, and I can't emphasize enough, the big missing piece here is there aren't enough fact checks. So there just aren't enough fact checks to draw from. So this hinders everything. But if you could get, and so this is why, I mean, it sounds, pie in the sky, but we need thousands more fact checkers. But if you could get a much greater volume of fact checks, you could deploy it on all social platforms and then use it in a much larger way to suppress inaccurate content. Facebook does that some now. Imagine if other platforms were to do that at scale, that could really have an impact on our misinformation problem.
To follow up on that a little bit, so Facebook does do some matching of false claims that are on the site that from work that's submitted by their third-party fact checkers, but just like you have issues like problems, sometimes matches don't quite line up with Squash. There are issues with all algorithms. Is this just a case of the technology needs to get better to the point where the algorithms can recognize it better, or does there need to always be some kind of human element in this in order to let this technology work as effectively as possible?
I would argue. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
No, I was gonna ask you to take that, Chris.
Oh, I'm sure we'd say the same thing, anyways. In my opinion, there is, for the foreseeable future, there will always have to be a human involved. Even if you have, like in a lot of machine learning, like 80-90% accuracy is considered excellent numbers, and it is within the context of machine learning. The problem is that that's still 1 in 10 1 in 10 claims that are marked wrong. And when it comes to political misinformation, as we all know, I'm sure everybody on this call knows, even 1 in 10 being wrong just fuels the flames even further. So even that small amount of chance that something could go wrong, 1 in 100, I don't think is even good. What I always say is we build tools for fact checkers, not to replace fact checkers.
That's a great line. And I was exchanging emails with a friend who couldn't make it for this today. And he works in AI, and he was saying that too often the goal is complete AI. And he said, we need to be satisfied with AI that goes pretty far, but then presents a menu of options to a journalist or to whoever, who then makes a final call. And AI is doing all this work to save the human a lot of wasted energy. And then the human does what they can do best, which is that final judgment that the algorithm can't do as well. And so, and I love this, especially coming from an engineer, a scientist who works in AI, who, you would think would be like, get rid of the humans, we're going to let the robots do everything. No, he recognizes that, so I do think, I think there's an important role. Yeah, so.
Got it. Question here from Natalie Gallet. She's asking, to play devil's advocate, how would squash be more effective than journalist specialists of the political guest of the show? So if you got a journalist who's there who knows their stuff, how is squash better than that?
Yeah, we call that the Aaron Shirachman challenge. Aaron, I had to say that before Erica did. Aaron Shirachman, the executive director of PolitiFact, has done a lot of their instant fact checking, and so we did it for our local TV station in Raleigh, Durham, WRAL. And the question is, who can hear what the politician says and find the relevant fact check fast in the database and retrieve it and display it, and so that's really the challenge. Now, I think squash can beat Aaron Shirachman most of the time. So this is a great test. We need to do this. I hope Aaron's watching. Yeah, and because what squash can do is go through thousands and thousands of fact checks, and Aaron's good, but I mean, really.
Bill, did you just call out Aaron Shirachman in a John Henry style competition?
I think he did. Although I will say that, with Gardner, we did need a team of people to go through all of the potential matches and approve them. If you had as many Aaron Shirachmans in the room as there were Gardners, you probably could do better. So I think that the answer is to clone Aaron Shirachman.
Okay, but given the fact that artificial intelligence is a little bit further along than cloning technology, we probably should focus our resources on the AI, I'm assuming.
Bill scrolls feverishly to see if Aaron's tuned in. He's not.
No, I think he's at O&A today. Let's see. We got another question here from Roger McDonald asking, what are the challenges of having the fact check community share their fact checks in an open database and their underlying ontologies? How can concerns for monetization and credit be creatively addressed?
That's a great question, Roger. And I know some of the fact checkers share your concern, and that's one we're working on. It's important fact checkers be paid for their work. And we don't expect fact checkers to donate this content at all. And so we have a variety of thoughts about that. And we've talked to one tech company about trying to pay fact checkers for the work that that's being used in these, and we were hopeful about that. But we think the fact checkers should be paid for all this. And I know as the founder of PolitiFact, how important it is to sustain this important work. So we're working on that too.
Got it. Let me look through here. Jen C. Jacob. There's a few Jen C. Jacobs on the call. So someone from the Boom team here is asking, can you please explain the last mile delivery of the match stories to the reader and how to avoid wrong matches? Is there a manual intervention before that last mile? I think that's a little bit what we're talking about with Gardner.
Erica, do you want to explain Gardner?
Yeah, sure. So what happens with Gardner is that we have all of the voice to text that's coming in is being run through ClaimBuster, which is an algorithm that filters out claims that are unlikely to be factual claims that are fact checkable. And so the ones that hit our threshold then go through the matching process with Squash algorithm to find claims in our database that seem to be relevant. And then they present those in Gardner to a human. So we see the original voice to text, and then we see the 3 matches that Squash has found in the database that seem to be the most relevant based on the keyword matching that we use. And so then the human editor looks through those, choices, and most of the time, I will admit, we hit reject and say, no, that doesn't match. But we also, a very good percentage of the time, do choose to accept one of those matches. And so then a human is responsible for what goes out to our users. So then as soon as a human approves the match, that's when it shows up in our web interface. And usually it's really only, a matter of seconds, as you saw in the video. The claim is ingested by the system, it makes it in front of a gardener, and then it gets to the final presentation within seconds.
Erica, just not to belabor the Aaron Schrockman point too much, but is there a feature in gardening? So if the Squash doesn't pick up on something, if a politician makes a false claim and the Squash doesn't match it, is there a feature for the gardener to go in and highlight that and find a fact check for a false claim?
Not now. We had talked about potentially having something along those lines for there to be more human interaction with the system. But right, for what we were working on, we were focusing on the matches that Squash could find and sorting through all of those. And we did have the opportunity, because of the way Gardener works with multiple people being able to review matches at the same time, to actually kind of look at more claims and more potential matches. So originally when we were developing Squash, we decided to set a fairly high claim buster score. So that's the system that weeds out things that are unlikely to be fact checkable claims. And so we kept it pretty high because we were relying on Squash to make matches. And so we didn't want to confuse it by giving too many claims that would be unlikely to be factual claims. So when we had a system of gardening, we could lower our threshold a little bit and let through more of the claims that were unlikely to be good matches, but we could find the little diamonds in the rough that came in as part of that process. And so that was another thing that helped our accuracy, was and the number of relevant matches that we could get through the course of the night, was being able to review more matches with more people, sorting out the bad things. Weeding.
Right.
I just want to jump in real quick and say the interface was designed by Justin Reese. We mentioned him earlier, but I wanted to bring him up one more time because he spent a lot of effort and work making it extremely capable and quite clean for the gardeners to actually interface with for hours sometimes.
Yeah, and it's very clever. It locks out other editors if somebody has claimed some matches to review, so that we're not duplicating each other's work. It's very quick. He also developed a system so that you can kind of filter which claims you want to remain on your screen. So once things have been rejected, you cannot see them anymore. It really did a great job to help editors focus, because when those claims are coming in during the course of a live event, they are fast and furious. They are coming in constantly.
Yeah, well, that's good. We got a question here. I'm going to switch here to we got a question from Summer Chen from Taiwan Fact Check Center. She is asking, would you please explain more details about how to improve the match from politicians' text to fact checks? Do you put more tags, or just do you do some work the fact checks to meet Squash's needs? So what needs to be done to improve that matching?
Mm-hmm. I guess I'll take this one. There's really, there's two different angles at this. The first one is that right now we're using a heavily tweaked version of Elasticsearch with some very specific designed indexes. I'm going to be a little technical because it seems like a technical problem or question, but feel free to break in and ask for any clarification. So we're using that. So further optimizing the types of indexes, the types of algorithms that are usable within various off-the-shelf search engines are going to be very necessary. That's, you can go all day, but at the end of the day, you're still mostly just comparing words, not meaning in any meaningful way, at least. And so then there's other methods that some of our colleagues at other fact-checking organizations are looking into, which I think is very worthy as well, trying to discern meaning from sentences, then compare meaning, right? So for those of you in the know, things, more advanced versions of Word2Vec, using things like Hugging Face, that sort of stuff. And then there's the angle that I've spoken about already today that I'm taking, where it's more about comparing topics and themes of sentences and less specific meaning. And so that's that last one is more geared towards a Gartner type situation where there's going to be a person in the middle. Things match up, but the details don't. Computers are always going to be very difficult in the details, and so we're working on, there's really a number of different approaches for this, but the tagging and such things really come into play for the third one specifically.
Got it. We got a question here from Florin Badita. The question is, can you explain a little bit about how we could help use this with other languages? So what work would need to be done to translate this outside of the English language in the United States context?
I guess this is another technical question. So aside from translating the actual interface, which obviously would have to be done, the underlying technology could work with any other language, as long as there's, again, as Bill and Erica both made notes of, enough content. And that's really the hard thing, is that aside from a few very other specific languages, Spanish being probably the major other one out there, there's just not really enough content, both in depth and breadth, depth of number of fact checks and breadth in number of themes and categories that are fact checked on a daily basis. That's no one's fault. It's man hours. Everyone on here has written fact checks. It takes time, it takes effort to produce quality content. And it's just a reality of English being, the modern day lingua franca in a lot of ways.
Makes sense. We're almost out of time, but I want to get in this question from Mark Graham, because he asked it a little bit earlier. He said, how can others access the claims reviews available from the claim review system, especially the appearance field? Said that access would help support experimentation, innovation, and progress.
We're all snickering. The claim appearance field is a little trickier. So claim review is open, and you can pull it from the API, which is available how, Chris?
The Google Search Console, or Google Fact Check API, it's built into all the Google API tools, so all your languages and everything like that. I think I know what Bill's going to say next.
We're in the process of trying to make it even more easily available in a project we're developing called Project Greenhouse, because of course it has to have a farming, gardening metaphor that would make it more readily available, because we think claim review ought to be more open to more people. We've discovered some cool things, not just for squash, but for academic uses, and relatively few academics have used it. So we're hoping that we can raise some money to make claim review and media review more available to everyone. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, you can access it as Chris said, and if you have questions, you can email Joel Luther or Chris, Christopher.guest@duke.edu or joel.luther@duke.edu.
With one caveat in that I don't think the appearance field is available through the API, unfortunately.
That was the reason for that.
The specific question, unfortunately, the very specific field is not available through the API, and it's something that we've all been discussing, working on, but I don't know. I'll let Bill say what we can actually say.
And just to explain to everybody what we're talking about here. So when fact checkers publish a fact check, they enter claim review. One of the fields is called claim appearance, and that traces, that gives the origin of the claim. So if the politician said it in a speech, it can be a link to the YouTube of the speech, or it can be a link to the text of the speech, or it can be a link to the article where that particular quote appeared. And that field claim appearance, it's now called, it had a more confusing name earlier, has great potential for tracing misinformation, and Mark is interested in it, as are many of us. So we'd love to see it more readily available. It has some challenges because it can, the inaccurate statement, so to speak, can appear in many different kinds of sites, like a legitimate news article or a bogus news site. And so it can provide a variety of signals, good and bad, that can be confusing to an algorithm. Got it.
Well, we're unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time, and we'll get a lot of questions still to be answered here. So if we didn't get to your question here, I'm sorry. One question Stephen Voss asked earlier in the thing that I wanted to get is there a way, if people want to get a copy of your slides or your presentation, is there a way we can make that available?
You bet. Stefan, just email me, bill.adair@duke.edu, and be happy to send it to you. And miss all of you. We should all be at Global Fact somewhere at happy hour, and my heart aches. And so looking forward to seeing everyone soon in Oslo and then Melbourne. Right?
Well, I don't. We haven't announced. We've not announced what's well, I mean, things
I don't know. Maybe.
Things are in the works. So maybe Melbourne. Bill is trying to manifest it. It's a vision board thing. So for those, our next Global Fact is going to be virtual. It's going to be from October 20th to 23rd. We're going to be announcing more of that later on in the summer. And then the next time we'll be in person, God willing, will be in June of 2022, where we'll be in Oslo. So stay tuned for more information about that. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, and I want to thank all of you for joining us on this and for helping with your questions and helping with generate this discussion. If people have more questions about this and want to ask them, what's the best way that they can get in touch with y'all?
I'm bill.adair@duke.edu, and awesome. Chris is christopher.guest@duke.edu, and Erica is elryan@gmail.com.
Great.
Awesome.
I'm also on the IFC and Slack. I know, Bill, you're there as well. I'm sure if you want to reach out there, we're available.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, guys. Have a wonderful rest of your day.